Welcome, everyone. I'm going to kick things off today. I'm Adrian Maglan, the State and Local Government Affairs Representative for the National Association of Realtors. NAR has been a part of the National Complete Streets Coalition since 2008. A little bit about NAR. We are a trade association with 1.2 million members. There are roughly 1,200 state or local realtor associations across the country. I highlight the numbers as a point that realtors serve as a voice for real estate in each community. There is not a need to cite a bunch of statistics or research projects, but it's obvious to me that when a person considers buying a home or when a business owner considers a location to provide their services, transportation is one of the top factors to make the decision to invest in that area. And I'm not just talking about buying property, but where that person wants to grow roots. One of the biggest threats to residential real estate is affordability. Oftentimes, housing supply is not a part of the conversation and the zoning measures that prohibit development. So I'm thrilled to be part of this webinar. I celebrate the combined efforts of this project in DC and the importance of incorporating complete streets and multimodal transportation options at the very beginning of the project development stage. I want to extend my appreciation and say thank you to Mike Maglan with VHB. Mike and I serve on the steering committee of the Complete Streets Coalition. This webinar today was Mike's vision, so I thank him for including me and the realtors in the conversation. With that, I will hand things over to Mike.
Thank you, Adrian. I'm Mike Maglan. I'm a Vice President of VHB and also Managing Director of our offices in the DC metro area. VHB is a professional services firm of roughly 1,400 people in 23 locations on the East Coast. Along with Adrian, I serve on the steering committee of the National Complete Streets Coalition and have for a few years. This year, the coalition wanted to broaden the conversation into the broader discussion of what cities can do to advance complete streets, not just through their transportation programs, but through holistic city programs. This is one of the first webinars in our series that is really focusing on what land development and land development agencies can do in cooperation with land developers to advance those goals. Adrian and I have known our moderator, Uwe Brandis, for several years. Uwe is with Georgetown University now and is a professor responsible for their urban planning and policy programs. We at VHB were delighted to partner with Uwe recently on a very well-attended Healthy Communities Symposium here in Washington, D.C. And I think that Adrian and I really felt as though Uwe's leadership on the areas of land development, land planning, and public-private partnerships were exactly the right mix to facilitate this conversation today. So without further ado, Uwe.
Thank you so much, Mike, and hello everyone out there. We have an amazing presentation for you today, and what we're going to do is first do a round of introductions to introduce our speakers. Then we're going to go through a series of presentations, and then we're going to carve out enough time in order to have both a discussion but also to field questions. So everyone on the line, I would hope that if you do have questions that you send them in through the webinar format. So why are we talking about this? I think one of the reasons why I think this topic is so important is that certainly people conventionally associate the public realm and transportation as a public responsibility, and indeed it is. But all of the practitioners on the line will know that the issues are not always as simple as that, and there often are important relationships and indeed sometimes important partnerships that allow the public to build out its infrastructure in partnership with private sector actors. And today we have really a phenomenal example of this, this case study of the Walter Reed redevelopment project. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce our speakers, And I'll start off with Randall Clark, who's representing the city. Randall, say a few words about yourself, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Randall Clark. I'm the director of the Walter Reed Local Redevelopment Authority. We are an instrument of the district's Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. And in short, we're basically the folks responsible for planning, acquiring, disposing, and implementing the development of the former Walter Reed Army Medical Center campus. I'm sure we'll talk in a lot more detail, but I'll probably start us off.
Great. Thanks so much, Randall. Next, we have Malaika Abernathy Scriven, who is the project manager for the Walter Reed project. Malaika, please say a few words and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Malaika Abernathy Scriven. I am the Walter Reed project manager on the LRA, working for the Deputy Mayor's Office for Planning and Economic Development. This project, the Walter Reed project, is near and dear to my heart, as I have been also involved in the development of the small area plan as well as the reuse plan. So myself and Randall, in different capacities, have been involved in the Walter Reed project for over 10 years. And so seeing it to this milestone of implementation is a really exciting phase of this development project, and working with the development team as well. So really excited to share this project with you all today.
Thank you so much. Our third and last speaker, last but not least, is Katie Weissek. Katie is the managing director at Heinz, the private development company. Katie, welcome. Why don't you share a few words about yourself?
Hi, thank you for having me. I am a managing director at Heinz, which is a privately held global real estate investment, development, and management firm. Heinz has partnered with Urban Atlantic and Trident as the master developer for the parks at Walter Reed. I have been involved since we submitted the proposal in 2013, and it is now my full-time project to be bringing this vision to fruition.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. So I did want to start off by saying that this is quite a remarkable project. No public-private partnership is like the next public-private partnership, and so we look forward to learning about this project today, but using this project to also get into the issues associated with how partnerships even are formed and how those partnerships serve the interest of building out great public realms, great places in cities, and of course, complete streets. So with that, I hand it back over to Randall.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try and just give a little background and overview of what we're doing at Walter Reed. I tend to live this, so I think everyone lives this campus. But the background here is that the Army operated here for over 100 years, and made the decision through the base realignment and closure process that they would be vacating the site. And the district embarked on a very long planning process to decide what do we do with it? What do you do with 100 acres of land that you didn't have access to for 100 years? You can imagine there's a large team of folks involved, and we wanted to kind of give you that sense here. So the Local Redevelopment Authority, again, that's the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, or DEMPED for short. Our master development team, the joint venture of Heinz, Urban Atlantic, and Trident Development Group. They've actually already identified some of their component developers, and who build out some of the individual portions of this. So Toll Brothers is on their team. There's a very innovative energy project that we have as part of this, and so WGL is involved in that. And you see Perkins and Will, who helped us with the master planning prior to the development entry onto the site. Tor Gallus is your architect for the full project. And Bowman on the civil engineering, Ben Sweden on the landscape architecture, which we're actually really excited about. And EFG Traceries, we should mention this is an historic site, and that's a firm that works on historic issues. Of course, Grove Slade on traffic engineering. You can also kind of get a sense, because I can't assume everyone knows where the site is. Malaika said it's near and dear to us. In my case, I live in the neighborhood, so it's definitely near to me. We're talking in northwest D.C., near the northern tip of the district. The site as you can see here, kind of plots out in relation to the red line of the metro system. So it's just about a half-mile west of the Tacoma metro station. So again, it's a rare opportunity. It was an amazing opportunity. I was involved going back to 2005 when the original BRAC announcement was made. And I can tell you that in the neighborhood there was some apprehension. Walter Reed had been a fixture in the neighborhood with major employment activity, and folks were concerned about what would happen if the Army left. But as more discussion continued, I think a lot of people started to realize the economic opportunity that could be there. And I think that's really represented with the plan that we have here. So again, I talked about the location in Northwest D.C., just south of downtown Silver Spring. The entire campus is 110 acres. The district was successful in purchasing 66 of those acres. Our neighboring uses are the Department of State, which is a foreign mission center that's planned on 31 acres on the west side of the campus, and a health science research campus being developed by Children's National Medical Center on 12 acres or so to the north. On our side of the campus, there will be just over 3.1 million square feet of development, a mix of uses. You kind of see the mix here, 1,480 apartment units, 550 condo units, office and ambulatory care, retail and creative uses, hotel and conference center, which is actually an adaptive reuse, proposes an adaptive reuse of probably the most historic building on the campus, the original 1909 Army Hospital. There'll be townhomes as well as nonprofit and educational uses. The schedule. The district closed on this property in late 2016 and immediately transferred it to our development partners. And so there'll be a build-out potentially over the next 15 years or so through 2030. It's an aerial of the campus here. Hopefully it comes through clearly. So the campus sits in between Georgia Avenue at the eastern border, 16th Street at the western boundary, Aspen Street to the south, and Fern Street to the north. I like this picture because it really shows that when we say infill, we really mean infill. We're sitting in between three long-established communities, Brightwood, Tacoma, and Shepherd Park, and adjacent to Rock Creek Park. To the north there, just to orient, the big square box, or sometimes we refer to it as the spaceship that landed on campus, is the 1970s era modern Walter Reed Hospital that actually will be a major demolition project that's actually begun to make way for the town center. This is just a sense of the history of the campus, both in terms of its original history and as our project moves forward. Again, the original Building 1, which is actually up in the right top corner of the slide here, dates back to 1909 when it opened. In 1977, the spaceship, I'm doing air quotes, the modern hospital opened. And then you see the process from 2005 when the BRAC announcement was made through the formation of the local redevelopment authority in 2006 and a series of planning processes, both the federal process mandated by the BRAC realignment, as well as local land use systems, because this site, again, was not zoned, realistically, because it had been in federal use for 100 years, through to the closing on the property in 2016 and the transfer. But I wanted to show you kind of the district's reuse plan that was developed back in 2012 and the main planning goals that came out of that plan. That was a community-led process. We had over 100 community meetings. It's actually how I became involved in this process because I was a part of that community group. But the main goals of the process were to integrate the site with the surrounding communities. This has been a fenced-off campus for decades, and it really didn't have any interaction with the surrounding neighborhood. wanted to provide for a mix of uses. Having had the large institutional user for decades, the goal was to provide a mix of uses that could animate the site in different ways. Create jobs and revenue for the district. Kind of self-evident on that one. That's always a goal. And the other one was to activate the site. What we did not want was for the campus to sit vacant for an extended period of time post the Army closure. In fact, it already had a certain amount of vacancy. The Army left in 2011, and so there were about 5 years. There was about 5 years with no activity. And here, kind of just wanted to talk through a couple things in the structure. So, of course, we had to acquire it from the Army. This was not a gift. So there was a long negotiation in terms of value. So the district did have to pay the Army for the property. And that was a multi-year negotiation. But while we were doing that, we were also doing the land use process. And included in some of that was, one, creating a small area plan, zoning for the site. We also, through the BRAC process, did a notice of interest process. BRAC regulations require that we offer space on the site to certain public benefit uses and homeless assistance providers. And we did do that, and we've got some great uses on the site. There will be, So Others Might Eat is building housing for formerly homeless seniors. Help USA is building housing for formerly homeless veterans. Howard University will be building an ambulatory care center. The DC Fire and EMS was able to get a site for a new fire station that had actually been sought for 20 years. And then finally, DC International School and Lamb Public Charter Schools were able to get onto the site. And they're actually open. So as of Labor Day week, there are about 1,000 kids going to school on the campus. And then finally, while we were doing all that, we did a solicitation for a private development partner. There was the decision made that the district didn't want to be the master developer for this campus. And so we sought a private developer, and kind of see the process there, starting from RFQ responses through, we throw the acronyms up there so quickly, BAFO, best and final offer, and then the final award was, I believe, in November of 2013. And so our development team has been on this project with us basically for 3 years prior to our actually acquiring the site from the Army. And Katie, you might want to talk a little bit about how you guys looked at structuring it.
Sure, yeah. So when we learned that there was an RFQ coming out for this site, we were very interested because it is rare to find such a large parcel within the district at 66 acres. So there's a great opportunity there to control a major site and a major pipeline in what we thought was a great location. So part of our response was, how do we respond to the plan, which we'll talk about later in this project, knowing that there was a lot of community input and history already there. You know, we weren't interested in reinventing the wheel, but how do we adopt that to something that has financial viability. So during the RFP response process, we pretty much came up with the master plan that we have today, and subsequently it was a lot of negotiations and further advancing that plan before we closed. But we also had to think about how we wanted to structure this deal with the district. And so then, and through the negotiations, we really looked at this as sort of a two-stage deal, one of which was as a land development. So I think you can't really bite off a 3.1 million square foot 15-year project in one sort of acquisition, really. So we looked at it as a land developer, basically putting in all of the infrastructure required and preparing lots for sale that would be in a ground lease with the district, and then ultimately released from the ground lease parcel by parcel for us to go vertical. That way you could find debt and equity on an individual project basis. You're not going to be able to find a 15-year loan or an investor who's willing to wait 15 years for their returns. So, and now I'm going to hand it back to Malaika to talk about the READS plan goals, and Malaika and I are going to go back and forth. It's like planning principle goals, and Malaika and I are going to go back and forth on sort of where the district was in their plan and how we, as the developer, responded to that plan.
Right. Thanks, Katie. So, as we stated before, this has been quite a significant planning process and very much involved with community input and very much founded on community input. And so part of that planning process, we did a market analysis that suggested that, there is a significant amount of demand that could be realized on this campus, 3.1 million square feet of development. And how do you establish a competitively viable mixed-use development in a historic campus? And that was kind of the question. We knew that we could support the demand, but once the fence came down, the historic fence came down, how could we reintegrate the site within the existing community in a manner that not only respects the historic character of the site, which we know has a significant legacy for Walter Reed, but also provide an opportunity to connect to the existing urban fabric in a manner that is safe, in a manner that is accessible, in a manner that provides a variety of options for all residents and visitors to access the site with. And so that became our kind of fundamental question about, even though we didn't technically use the term complete streets, we did know that this next, that reintegrating the site into this existing neighborhood needed to have a balanced transportation network. And those connections were very important in understanding. And so as we look at the planning process and the development of the small area plan, we established these kind of high-level urban design principles that you see here. And so what Katie and I will do for this part of the presentation is I'll share with you what those planning principles were, and she'll then respond to how the development team have implemented those strategies. And so the first strategy is really understanding the urban fabric of the site. This is the site that our nation's wounded warriors and veterans were cared for. And so that history and those memories need to live on and need to be relevant and prevalent in the history and in this new phase of development. And so understanding what makes Walter Reed's character Walter Reed was a very much in-depth urban design analysis. And although there wasn't really one overarching urban typology because of the site's topography, because of the way the buildings are aligned on the street within the site, we knew that there were definitely some characteristics that were evident in these 5 character bands that are identified here. And for example, we knew that the original hospital, which is in Building 1, we call it Building 1, which is the orange bar, really sets the stage for how all of the other buildings around the site relate to the site and create this kind of campus-like setting. And so understanding each of these character bands is how we anticipate introducing new infill development onto the site in a manner that's respectful of the historic character.
Okay, so this is our master plan, and how we responded to that was really to follow the lead that the reuse and small area plan took, starting from the north end of the site where we have our townhomes located, which relate to the scale of the single-family homes across the street, moving into your densest portion of the site, what we called Eisenhower Village, because that is the location of the 2.6 million square foot hospital that we plan to demolish. It was already disturbed as a historic campus goes, and also set back from the street and along Georgia Avenue, where you also have more existing multifamily development. And we looked at the site and really saw it as a series of open spaces and buildings built around the open spaces, working together with the historic buildings. So these aren't ultimately going to be the names necessarily that we select for these parks, but the project name, the parks at Historic Walter Reed, is really built on the fact that this is a series of open spaces and components that are organized around those open spaces.
The second kind of high-level urban design principle is really focusing on the original hospital, Building 1, as the core. As we stated before, it was the first hospital, was the first building to be opened on the site in 1909, and subsequently have all of the other buildings relate back to Building 1. We also knew that Building 1, retaining Building 1 as the core, we would also need to pay attention to preserving the other historic elements of the site. So the other buildings that are in orange here represent the other historic contributing structures to this historic district. What's also of unique interest is the fact that not only do we have historic buildings, but we also have historic landscapes that Katie spoke a little bit about earlier. And these historic landscapes directly relate back to the centralized building, Building 1, as the main kind of heart of the site. And not only that, but the historic landscape and the historic alignment of Main Drive, which is the meandering drive in the middle of the slide, is also of importance and is also contributing to defining Walter Reed's legacy. And so really understanding, these different character bands, as we stated before, and really understanding the way that Walter Reed relates as a historic campus setting is very important in integrating the site back into the existing community.
So we also looked at the site and its historic buildings, and there are some non-historic buildings that we're keeping. All of the existing buildings are gray here. The new buildings are pink. And we analyzed the various axes in the site for helping us define the master plan. And you'll see 13th Street, which is one of the new streets that we reintroduced, was traditionally a vista towards the north of Building 1 that was disrupted with the construction of the 1970s hospital that we are in the process now of demolishing. And what we took from the plan here is that we needed to go through Historic Preservation Review Board during the years prior to closing on the site. So we went to them twice. First to review the plan and as well as the heights and massing, because the relationships of the building scale to the historic buildings is also important, not just looking at on 2D in a plan, but in 3D, and street alignment as well. And then we went a second time to review design guidelines. We thought it was important to develop this set of guidelines that provides a recommendation for how new development would fit with within the site, so addressing landscape, urban design, and architectural principles for new construction, and that it didn't preclude us from doing contemporary architecture, but we prescribed sort of where is it appropriate to do contemporary, where is it appropriate to do traditional, how do those work, what elements of the architectural style and massing need to be addressed. And it was also an important due diligence effort for us to know, as we're getting into acquiring such a major site, that we would be permitted to execute the vision and the mapping, and we wouldn't have an issue in the future where this building you showed on the plan actually isn't historically appropriate to build. All right.
So thinking about how we're reintegrating the site back into this urban fabric, back into this existing stable residential neighborhoods, we also are not only thinking about the actual streets and roadways, but we're also thinking about reconnecting it back to the existing open space, because we know that the open space and the green areas here on the campus are very significant and have the opportunity to connect and provide other opportunities to really establish this campus-like setting. And so preservation of the site's historic green and open spaces is really important to this goal. And so we also thought about other ways in which we can celebrate the site's green and open areas by doing that, by integrating it, naturalized stormwater management systems, urban agriculture, as well as recreational opportunities to kind of showcase some of the innovative models of sustainability that this is a site that, has a lot of very wonderful goals. And so I remember during the planning process, we also were very adamant about ensuring that its sustainability is innovative and top of the art. So this is another opportunity for us to showcase those innovative sustainability goals within our open space.
Similarly, we want to celebrate those open spaces as part of the development of the site because we know that those open spaces will be attractive to both the community at large, which these spaces will be open to the public, and that is helping us activate the site. But it also is unique to find in living in apartment buildings or condo buildings to have this sort of amenity base of open spaces within your community that will be maintained as part of the ownership association is not typical. And so we think it's a big asset to have these open spaces and then to activate them as a series of parks and then program them, which we'll talk a little bit about later.
One of our fourth principles is urban design principles is really focusing on extending the street network and integrating it with the community. We've mentioned this a number of times because it really is a fundamental component of our development program. Is this historic fence had secluded Walter Reed for over 100 years, and so how do we reintegrate back into this urban grid in a manner that celebrates the historic character of Walter Reed? And we talked about one of the ways is obviously extending the street network, but it's not necessarily just creating a grid on top of Walter Reed. It's really understanding the topography, understanding the historic setting, and then establishing these multimodal ways, these multimodal transportation systems to connect to this very dynamic development program. And so later on in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about what those streets actually look like.
So I think it's important to touch on that. It's not just about the vehicles, but it's about the design of those streets and creating appropriate pedestrian zones with sidewalks, having bike lanes, considering where the curb cuts go, how do you access parking garages, where's the loading, and that all wraps into what makes a good plan aesthetically and also functionally. So since this is a lot about streets, people might be interested in sort of the prototypical street design. We have a combination of 75-foot right-of-ways and 90-foot right-of-ways. It doesn't mean we're going to build the buildings right to the right-of-way line necessarily, but in certain areas of the site we are going for more of an urban feel, whereas in others more of a pastoral feel. And in the upper left you can see that that is our street grid. We have followed the plan as shown by the district. And then our street does include both a sidewalk, planter strip, parking lane, bike lane, and then two-way travel. But we also have some interesting, unique streets, such as Main Drive, which is a historic street, and which we could not actually widen, but we wanted to be able to accommodate bicycles. So for that, we proposed a hiker-biker trail, which was accepted, even though it's unique, by the District Department of Transportation as a solution to accommodating that need.
And so staying in tune with our high-level urban design goals, we definitely had some sustainability goals, celebrating Walter Reed's historic legacy of healing and innovation. We have these goals that we wanted our new development needed to adhere to. So net zero by 2030, obviously. Preservation, adaptive reuse of our existing buildings and structures, which we identified what the majority of the historic structures will be adaptively reused. And really enhancing kind of the green breathers and open space throughout the site from Georgia Avenue to the west to 16th Street and Rock Creek Park to the east. And so those are some of the ways in which we wanted to target this site being a very sustainable and innovative new development. Some of the new buildings will also have photovoltaics. We'll have wide right-of-ways to allow sunlight, and in some instances also stormwater management practices will be implemented in the streets right-of-way. We'll be able to capture and treat and reuse gray water to reduce potable water demand, and obviously creating a multimodal transportation system, which we mentioned before. So not only encouraging bikes and pedestrian activity, but also cars and transit throughout the site, and ensuring that the circulation of all these modes are sufficient in accessing these new uses. And then native plants throughout the site and no invasive species.
And I don't think I need to run through all of this because it's a little bit of a reiteration, but one thing that we did, which was, I think, unique to the goals, was looking for how this goal of net zero by 2030, which is not, I would say it's aspirational, but we tried our best during the process of figuring out how that could be achieved in the climate of DC, which is not a moderate, Southern California climate. So we did an RFP process for energy developers that would be brought in to do a microgrid and series of energy centers to provide either cogeneration or trigeneration through a connected loop within the campus, so that you do have, although it's not, what we ran into the issue is that even at 3.1 million square feet, because it's phased over time, it's really not that much load, but we are still trying to implement that, and we've brought in WGL as a partner to install the infrastructure and manage it, and then connect to the new construction.
And obviously we wanted to provide a mix of uses here. This is a destination not only for neighborhood serving uses, but we also have the opportunity to provide really demand-driven or retail uses as well. And so we have anticipated a really active town center, an Aspen Arts District, which is a great opportunity to realize creative uses and art types of uses. Pershing Park, which helps support the vista, this grand vista into Building 1, the original hospital building, in a manner that further celebrates it as the core of the site and the heart of the site. And then some townhouse opportunities that relate and are compatible to the existing residential neighborhood to the north of the site. And so we really think we have a balanced mix of uses here on the site that will be attractive. If we get our transportation system and our connections by reintegrating the site back into the existing community in a manner that is attractive and accessible for all modes of transportation, we think that this will be a really exciting development, not only for the neighbors in Ward 4, but also for the city as well.
And I would add that the mix of uses that we've come up with, and these are just a few renderings that we have developed as we plan the site, it's primarily residential, but having those smaller mixes of commercial and a decent amount of retail where it's viable helps to create that active site, and it's a place that people want to live. And if you have some people that work there, they'll help utilize the retail in the workday hours when your residents may not be there. So it's synergistic to create a mixed-use place. And then within the residential component, we're providing a mix of both affordable and market rate housing, as well as for rent and for sale, so that we can kind of capture the full range of the market. And that also allows us to phase the site as quickly as possible. If we did all market rate apartments, you could only absorb it so quickly. And by creating this mix, it allows us to phase the site as quickly as possible. And so I'll just go through the two more slides here. One of them is in response to the district's goal to activate the site. And we are, besides the site activation that comes out of creating a pedestrian and bike-friendly place where people want to go and shop and live, we are programming the site with a series of public events to help bring people to the site, especially during the period prior to full build-out, where it helps to create recognition of this new development within the community and starts to bring people there, anything from farmers markets to fitness, which we've already rolled out. And lastly, one of the district's goals was also to have this project come to fruition as quickly as possible. And this is just a diagram that kind of shows sort of how the project will be phased. And part of the phasing determination is driven by what infrastructure needs are required to serve the site. Many of the first phase buildings are actually the nonprofit notice of interest users who were selected prior to developer and have been working for many years on their plans, but they're also moving into existing buildings. So it's easier for them to construct or rehab those buildings, such as the school, which has already opened in the left, lower left portion of the plan. And then our first new construction component is the southeast corner, because it doesn't require the extent of infrastructure or demolition to access that you have in the northern half of the site. And then some of the historic buildings we are actually occupying a few of those as interim offices, and ultimately we'll redevelop them, and then building one at the core. The hotel generally, if we wanted to go in that direction, wanted to come in later in the phasing, but we would certainly hope to accelerate that if there is demand. Really, that's that. It will be constructed over 10 years, but full build out, or the parcels will be released over probably about 10 years, but full build out in about 15 years. And I just wanted to conclude that it's been a great relationship working with the district, really in a collaborative process to achieve this vision and meet the goals of the district, have a viable site for development that we will be able to find investors and have be financially feasible, but yet integrate with the community and implement the complete street.
That's great. Thank you so much. We now have a much, much better understanding of this really phenomenal project. This is not just a greenfields development project. This is truly infill, looking at existing urban fabric, taking this campus and connecting it to the rest of the city. It's really such a phenomenal project. So while you were presenting, we've had just a tsunami of questions roll in. And what I'm going to do is try my best here to paraphrase some of them and kind of combine them, and let's engage in an interactive conversation in order to answer as many of these as we can. And for those of you on the line, if your specific question doesn't get answered in our conversation, there will be, I guess, a blog that will answer all of the questions. So thank you, everyone. So what I'd like to start off with is a really basic question, and that is, you did a wonderful job explaining the public engagement and the very long multi-year public planning process to come up with a concept for reusing the site. But Randall, who's paying for this? And could you just unpack the relationship that you've established with this private party?
Sure. So that long process, most of that was the district. So the district, with the benefit of a federal grant that's available to communities that are experiencing the loss of a military installation, did a lot of that due diligence up front, market studies, to see what we could actually do here. And so and part of why we did that, one, was for our own understanding as we put the plan together and make sure we put a plan that was viable. But also, once the decision was made to bring in a private developer, we actually took some of the risk out for them. We had already done that planning process all the way through to zoning. And so with the exception of the site is an historic district, so with the exception of the need to go before the Historic Preservation Board for any new construction or exterior modifications. This is actually a by right plan in full accordance with the zoning. And so we basically took some of that up front.
That's great.
Going forward, or as of November of last year, any of the work inside the campus primarily is at the expense of the development team. The development team will be responsible for all of that infrastructure, the road work, et cetera, that's happening on the campus.
So just to drill down into that just a little bit more, and maybe this is for you, Katie, as a private entity, you will be delivering public infrastructure. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so just reflect a little bit for us from your perspective of wanting to deliver the site and obviously ultimately wanting to deliver real estate that can be sold to into the marketplace. How are you approaching the delivery of the public infrastructure?
So we have approached it, I think, in a thoughtful manner because we've, mostly from the phasing perspective of making sure the infrastructure that we put in meets the needs of the new construction and not sooner, because that's expensive to build it all up front. So we've really, it is expensive to put in all new roads, water lines, sanitary sewer. So we tried to make sure that what we are doing really meets the phasing of the new construction. So for example, Main Drive is an existing road that's in fine shape. We're not planning to redo that road up front. We're planning to redo that road later in the process. But we're working with the District Department of Transportation up front to make sure that our master plan and approach to the roads is accepted so that when we do come to it later down the way, we have an understanding of what's happening.
And when you deliver that infrastructure, will you immediately turn it over to the city, or do you plan on maintaining elements of it yourself?
So in certain cases, a lot of the open spaces and parks will be maintained by the Owners Association, and we do have a few unique areas of the road network that we also plan to keep private, but yet open to the public. And one of those is the section of 12th Street in the town center between Elder and Dahlia, and it actually goes above an existing parking garage that we plan to reuse. So that's not typical in the district to have a public road going over a parking garage. So that would be private, and it also gives us the flexibility to do special events on that road, farmers markets and other things. But the rest of it, by and large, except for some of these smaller drives at the south end, we would turn over once accepted by DDOT. So, we've completed them. They do their inspection. They accept the road. They would be released from our ground lease and accepted as public streets.
And they would take care of it at that point?
They would maintain them going forward. There's sort of a period of where we would still be responsible for any issues that developed in, I would say, the first year or so, and after that, the maintenance is by the city.
So next question is kind of building on that, and that is, this is of course a planner's dream. On the one hand, there are important constraints and processes associated with the historic preservation frameworks. But on the other hand, this is just an amazing big master plan community project. And so as you thought about the infrastructure, were you just blindly following the city's existing standards, or were there enhancements and special elements of the infrastructure that you built into this that the city may not have otherwise built on its own?
Yeah, that is interesting. I think that some of the standards that are in place for the roads, for example, do make sense. There's been a lot of thought that went into that by the District Department of Transportation, so we're not, in some areas, yes, we're not reinventing the wheel. I think our landscape plan will be unique to the site, making our stormwater management and our GAR goals are higher than a typical development. So we're going to have cisterns. We're going to use bioswales in the public in the private, but open to the public spaces. And we will probably use sort of special paving in certain areas to relate to the historic district that wouldn't have been prescribed. In fact, there aren't streetscape standards for this part of the district. It's really more your typical road section that's prescribed, but how we evolve to making this a unique place involves unique landscape features, I think.
So I just want to point that out. It's really one of the great benefits of this kind of a public-private partnership, because you're taking a very deliberate approach to the design of this public infrastructure. It sounds like it's moving beyond just following the straight engineering specifications that the city's transportation department has developed.
But one point to note also, any new construction is going to be reviewed by our historic review board, and so there's definitely a back and forth there with the development team and our state historic preservation officer, which is very much interested in how these new any new buildings or new amenities relate back to, again, the historic character of the site.
That's great. Now, in the introduction, you established that the site is close, but not immediately adjacent to the metro system. We have a number of questions here about innovation in the transportation approach to the project. We, of course, in Washington, like so many other cities around the country, are dealing with an onslaught of innovation in mobility services and in transportation approaches. Could you just review, I guess, two things? One, what were the basic land use assumptions that you brought to this with respect to parking? And then secondly, how are innovative mobility solutions being integrated into this strategy?
So from a parking perspective, when we did the market analysis, we knew that there was going to be this mix of uses, 3.1 million square feet of uses. And so we, during the planning process, we determined that there were going to be a maximum cap for parking. And that cap would be realized and enforced in the zoning of the site. And so the master development team essentially is using that cap in a manner that relates back to the zoning.
Yeah, so I think from a parking perspective, because it's not directly adjacent to the site, we know there will be people that choose to drive due to its location. Sort of, you may have some folks that work in the district, some that work in Maryland. You're going to end up with people who own cars. So yes, we're providing parking that we think will meet the market for the distance to the metro. We do have a number of bus lines serving the site, and we also plan to reintegrate a public bus line that can go through the site. Historically, there was a bus route that went through the site when it was an operating base, so we would want to bring that back to even increase the access. We also know that there's sort of a future with Uber and Lyft and other transit that hopefully that helps to reduce the car ownership over time, and whether it's creating sort of pullover lanes or where we would otherwise have street parking, creating zones for pickup, drop-off. I think it's something we will definitely take into consideration as we build out each part of the site.
I think on top of that, even in the current plan, there were things incorporated for car sharing services. Bike sharing is very robust in the district. There will be at least two.
Yeah, it was 3. I think we'll probably end up with 3 bike shares, but at least 2.
Right. And so in addition to transit benefits and that sort of thing in some of the buildings, so we've kind of tried to plan for the world we have today in terms of transit alternatives, and I think what Katie's talking about is the things to come.
That's a good point Randall makes. There's in the parking cap, it was sort of to force us to encourage alternative uses, mostly to mitigate traffic, but it's also the direction of the future.
Right. So last question, and then we're running out of time here. Randall, any responsible approach to creating complete streets has to integrate infrastructure and land use together. I mean, we can all agree on that. But one of the most interesting things about this project is the series of different kinds of land uses that really span a spectrum from straight market-driven land uses that Heinz will deliver to a series of community amenities, including community centers, arts districts, So is Heinz building all that off of their own balance sheet, or are you participating in the delivery of these exciting community benefits?
So when we talk about the community benefits in terms of the parkland that's being maintained, that's part of Heinz project. That's part of what Heinz and Urban and Trident are doing. The school, in our case, is a charter school. They provided their own financing and built out their own building. The fire station, which actually is not shown on this map, but if you see an 18 just across Georgia Avenue on that prior plan, it's just across the street from the campus. The district did build that out. There are plans for a pool, a city pool here on the site. That would be something that the district will do. But basically everything else that we've talked about is part of the responsibility the development team has taken on.
That's great. That's great for clarifying that. So I'd like to just finish with just a quick round. If everyone could just quickly reflect on, your engagement in this process and how the fact that this is a public-private partnership, how that has allowed you to achieve goals that you may not have otherwise achieved through just a regular project. Katie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think one of them is, as it relates to the plan, the zoning process that was done in advance of closing while we were already engaged and selected, but we hadn't closed yet. Going through having the district shepherd the project through zoning as opposed to doing a PUD by a private developer, I think really helped facilitate the right outcome for the site. And having that community support that the district has generated allowed us now to move forward each phase with already having built that support and having the by right development besides the HPRB process that really helped reduce the risk. And I think that is a huge impact on our ability to execute.
This is Malaika. From a planner standpoint, we were required to undergo a federal planning process where the base reef planning was established, and then we also were required to meet the local standards for the city as far as land use is concerned and as far as zoning is concerned, and transportation for that matter. And so we were really focused on also establishing a small area plan, which is our local tool for implementing land use. And so that process, even though it was very unique to this site, was, I think, really beneficial for us from the standpoint of really engaging the community in a significant, long-standing community planning process. And I think once both of our plans were approved by council unanimously, we had a local redevelopment authority group that represented the community for the base use plan, unanimously approved. And so I think with all of the community input and community engagement, we really have a sound, viable, mixed-use development that is supported, for the most part, by the community. And I think that's resonated even after in our implementation of the site. So.
Thank you.
I'll just say from the district standpoint, this is an amazing opportunity that we have to create. Effectively, you're creating a new neighborhood in a city that doesn't have new land being created, right? We can't annex from the neighboring states. We have to operate with what we have. We're a growing city. Over the last few years, we've been adding a net 1,000 people a month in the district. And so the opportunity to create additional housing, as the deputy mayor likes to say, Deputy Mayor Kenner, we work to create jobs, affordable housing, and tax revenue for the district. And here we have an opportunity to do all of those things and have a real impactful change and benefit to the surrounding communities. And we've also benefited with that long planning process from community support, but actually probably unprecedented, I would think, local government support. And in this case, both myself, because I live in the neighborhood and have been involved for a decade, but also so is the deputy mayor and so is the mayor, who formerly represented this area on the council, and the council member who was previously on her staff and has been before. So we've got local officials, even down to the advisory neighborhood representatives, ANC representatives, with long histories on the site and lots of interest in and finding the path to moving forward. And that cooperative spirit has helped us get to this point.
That's great. I'd like to thank each of you for presenting and sharing your work with us today. And I'd especially like to congratulate each of you for working on such an amazing project. And this undoubtedly, has been such an important federal site. It's a site important to the nation's history. But I think what you are doing, your work, is really creating an important benchmark and precedent for best practice in public-private partnerships. So thank you. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Smart Growth America to help close us out.
Thank you, Uwe. Hi, this is Namotala Aziz, Program Associate with the National Complete Streets Coalition. We hope you all enjoyed the webinar today, and again, a thank you to all of our presenters. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar on November 21st at 1 p.m. We'll be discussing creative placemaking and complete streets. We'll hear from Circulate San Diego as well as City Heights Community Development Corporation on how they used creative placemaking and cultural gathering spaces to engage community members. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.